Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to this public hearing of the Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is Jane Way-Allen Armstrong. I am the MLA for Mofi-Clutha Region and chair of this committee. At this time, I will ask the MLA on this committee to introduce himself. First, I'll introduce Robert Hawkins. He is MLA for YK Center. And okay, there's two. We'll start with the two MLAs in the room. Sorry about that, I do apologize.
Good afternoon, I'm Shauna Morgan. I'm the MLA for Yellowknife North, and I'm a member of the Social Development Committee, and so I'm really excited to be able to hear from the various education bodies today and have a little bit of discussion back and forth as to where we're at and what the next steps could be. Thank you.
Emily for Frame Lake, Julian Morse. Thanks.
Okay, those online?
Hi, my name is Cheryl Yatlaya. I'm the member for the Det'anchogh. Thank you and welcome.
And I'm Kieran Testard. I'm a member for Range Lake here in Yellowknife.
Okay, thank you. Okay, today committee will hear from representatives of multiple Northwest Territories education bodies about the impacts that funding changes to a Jordan principle have had on Northwest Territories students and educators. First committee will hear from Yellowknife Catholic Schools, followed by the Sahtu Divisional Education Council, followed by Yellowknife Education District Number 1, and ending with the South Slave Divisional Education Council. After that, we will hold a question and answer session with all four education bodies. Since we have participants both in person and virtual, I will remind everyone today to please wait to be called on by me as chair before speaking to ensure a smooth meeting. So at this time, I would like to turn to the floor to Yellowknife Catholic Schools. Please proceed with your presentation.
Yellowknife Catholic Schools is a faith-based district serving over 1,300 students from junior kindergarten to grade 12. We offer diverse programming, including French immersion, Welede Yati, and land-based education rooted in the belief that we are partners in care with families to provide a safe, nurturing environment. For 5 years, Jordan's principal funding has leveraged our inclusive schooling strategies, providing critical responsive support for Indigenous students who are neurodiverse or trauma affected. Through close collaboration with families, YCS has developed targeted interventions that achieve measurable, holistic, and academic outcomes. Currently, this funding supports 543 students through a highly integrated team of 48 UNW personnel and 11 teachers. Without this essential backbone of funding support, the quality of our early intervention, therapeutic support, and well-being of our students will significantly be diminished. The loss of Jordan's principal funding directly impacts our most vulnerable students. It impacts our relationships with families, as we are the guardians and experts of their children's development. Schools are unique community hubs that can, when supported, respond to the unique needs of their community members. The scope of our support was in speech and language, early intervention, and direct therapies, cultural resiliency, and academic support to increase graduation. YCS has 9 projects with 56 staff, where 543 students receive support. We have 36 students with classroom assistants, 6 complex need children, nonverbal for speech language support and AAC, 160 students assessed for speech and language delays in the elementary grades between 2023 and 2025, 40 students, 20 primary SLPA, and 20 to 1 elementary SPLAs. 41 students with social emotional coaches, 93 students and families with the community liaison, 105 students with the Det'anchogh program, 119 students with the Alternative Learning Center, the ALC, which is 2 semesters, and 89 students across grades 1 to 7 for literacy and math intervention. Liz.
So before I give more of the direct impacts, I just want to acknowledge an elder who, by the name of Helen Toby, she guided me in my early years and in the importance of cultural knowledge. And so I honor her presence and I bring her teachings with us today. I also want to make note that in our submission for YCS, we did provide our 2024-2025 Jordan's Principle report that really digs down and gives you a good information around our numerical outcomes, our results, and what those 9 projects really provided for our Indigenous students. So I'm not going to talk so much about numbers today in terms of impact. And also, too, I do have available for you at the end our whole district inclusive schooling support data for our non-Indigenous and Indigenous students that outline the numbers of students that we know with formal diagnoses, and once again, what are our challenges as a district in servicing all those needs. So with 43 years of dedicated years of inclusive schooling in Yellowknife, and as an associate member of Inclusion Education Canada, I can state quite clearly and with certainty that our YCS support system will be on life supports next year. And that those of us who are accountable for children and youth, particularly those with neurodiversity, are no longer just struggling. We are living the rapid erosion of a framework that took a decade to build. And so the legacy of Jordan River Anderson, has provided us with the means to offer responsive, culturally grounded support to over 500 Indigenous students. And that slide that you see just currently right now about the impacts and the cost really outlines the essential support structures which we have worked hard to develop in the last 5 years with collaboration with our families. And those structures will significantly diminish next year. And this loss signifies more than just a funding cut. It totally collapses a regional safety net for our students and for our families. And by eliminating the access to speech and reducing our literacy supports and our trauma-informed interventions for over 250 high-risk students, this cut directly compromises the graduation pathway for Indigenous graduates who depend on those customized supports. And without our community liaison and our social emotional trained staff, this district will be forced to abandon proactive, culturally grounded teaching opportunities to a crisis management model, stripping away student safety to develop coping skills for themselves and the land-based lifelines that has reversed our student chronic absenteeism. Ultimately, this regression shifts the weight of student well-being on, as you know, an already overstretched NWT healthcare and childcare system. And what is critical in all of this, is once again, we are pulling away another ladder for our families to experience once again in the territories our continued practice of fragmented cross-departmental service delivery for our most complex neurodiverse children. And a stark example of this crisis occurs, during a meeting that I had last January with Stanton Rehab hospital managers. And at this January meeting, I was asked as to what services YCS will be supporting next year for our neurodiverse students who require speech and OT support. And I told them quite clearly that the $190,000 that Jordan's principal provides us has ceased to exist next year, and it will decimate our capacity to deliver those essential interventions. And based on the fact that YCS has 396 children formally diagnosed, non-Indigenous and Indigenous, I have about $50,000 from my inclusive schooling budget to figure out how I will provide support and prioritize the 124 students I know who have been diagnosed with language disorder. And this funding gap effectively ends our proactive model and forces us to once again triage and abandon the most vulnerable kids to what they need most. And the goal of inclusion, of inclusive schooling, is also about strengthening teachers who are the primary experts in the long-term development and the most consistent environment besides their homes in a child's life. 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, over a span of 12 years. And the success of learners is linked to the successful learning of adults. And we can no longer simply expect our frontline staff, our teachers, to do their best as they attempt to unilaterally meet the needs of children's education, health, and mental well-being. Our data reveals currently right now, very similar to across the southern provinces, that there is a critical trend happening in education, and we are no different in the north. And that is, it's called classroom complexity. And where the sheer scale of student needs exceed the manageable threshold for teachers to provide quality instruction. And this shortfall in inclusive schooling funding, combined with the loss of the external lifeline funding, like Jordan's principal, is not just eroding programs, but it's fueling exhaustion, systemic exhaustion for the people who have to deliver and work with children. And this reality is reflected in our teacher burnout and the ongoing crisis we have in recruiting program support teachers and coordinators like myself who have to lead the inclusive schooling supports and to ensure that teachers and students' needs are met in order to thrive. And we don't have a sustainable foundation. And it's going to really erode our human resources. And so in order to restore this functional learning conditions, we must equip our educators with the tools to confidently help them help our students. And achieving true equity requires a robust data system to identify who are our children and who has to be our priority children. Because we don't have the funds for everyone, right? And so we have to figure out a framework that supports across all government sectors and community services, because we cannot do it by ourselves. And the educators cannot provide a continuum of care in a vacuum, because school districts have to be seen as proactive authorities. We need to be valued as proactive authorities to ensure that we are alongside other departments and being strategic with our resources, and to ensure that the burden of health and social interventions does not solely lie on classroom teachers, but it's a shared, integrated, interdepartmental safety net.
The growing systematic barriers and inaccessibility of support also put our relationships with families in severe jeopardy. Families depend on our staff in ways that are radically different than a few years ago. Inclusive education is a shared commitment, but it requires sustained investment in many forms and at all levels of leadership. We are hopeful the Department of Education, Culture and Employment Inclusive Schooling Review will update its funding and necessary guidelines that will give strength to the roles and responsibilities that champion our most vulnerable but capable children and youth. This must be done in deep collaboration with the different levels of leadership. More effort and motivation towards shared government priorities that upholds and realizes territorial capabilities right down to understanding class complexity and teacher training needs more conversation. At the highest levels, schools are placed in a position of community hubs that are able to be responsive and decision makers of how to best meet the needs of all students.
So our very last slide. And I want to say that we know that we cannot access Jordan's principle. And we have, and like I said, we have lots of data to prove that the last 5 years of that support has really created some incredible opportunities for our most vulnerable, which is our Indigenous children. And I always say that across Canada, the most vulnerable children in the country are Indigenous children who have a disability, who have trauma, and live in poverty. And I feel that we have an opportunity here through the Inclusive Schooling Review. As a district, we're very excited to be able to work collaboratively with our government and with our ministry to figure out how are we going to recalibrate? How are we going to be from a deficit model to a team around children? And also to have high expectations for every child, every student. We have to have high expectations for every student to access curriculum and to flourish their chosen identity. And we hope that this review will foster a closer relationship between the Minister of Education and the Minister of Finance, because that relationship has to be a lot closer in order to ensure equity in education. And we have to work on a robust phased strategic funding system to ensure that this is a long-term investment, inclusive schooling, and that it is a journey in our truth and reconciliation. And if you look at the slides, we recognize that the Department of Education is needing some capacity themselves, and that we have to blend and merge inclusive education with indigenizing education and the community realities, especially for YCS. We have a different reality than everybody else, and we have to be unique in recognizing that, but honor that. And I also believe that we have to have more ways and more robust data to prioritize, like BC has done, to say who are our priority children and how do we create a wraparound and make sure that we do our best. And then the last thing is that we have to erase the silos in departments. There is not enough information sharing to get the work done in a timely fashion. And once again, our families and our children are waiting for supports, and it's way too long. And so with that, we just want to close.
In summary, the vision of becoming capable people rooted in Indigenous wisdom and upheld by our elders continues to guide our aspirations in Northern education. To live out this vision, we need practical support in place, clear policies, the right resources, and strong partnerships across departments. These are the tools that allow schools to focus on students' strengths rather than their challenges, and to help every child develop the skills and confidence they need. It is our shared responsibility to carry this wisdom forward and make sure the next generation is prepared to build a resilient, prosperous, and culturally grounded future for the North. Thank you, Masi.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from the Sahtu Divisional Board of Education. Please proceed with your remarks.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Heather Baressa. I'm the chair of the Sahtu Divisional Education Council. Thank you for inviting us to speak today. The statue is made up of 5 communities: Fort Good Hope, Norman Wells, Tulita, Delaney, and Colville Lake. And we have approximately 500 students enrolled in our school for the 5 communities, and they are overwhelmingly Indigenous students. And we have accessed Jordan's Principle since 2019 to fill gaps in support services to our First Nations children in the Satu. And this is giving our students the same chance as non-First Nation students who live in other areas. And also, this is a very remote part of the Northwest Territories, and our issues and concerns are, I think, unique than other places in Canada to serve our students successfully. So we've used Jordan's Principle since 2019 to fill those gaps. The territorial funding that we do receive is insufficient to meet our needs and our students' needs in this area. And without the additional funding of Jordan's Principle, our students fall behind. And we are very grateful for all that we've been able to accomplish with Jordan's Principle to date. It's been a game changer for our region and for our students. Some of the programs that we've accessed because of our Jordan's Principle funding have been wide-ranging. We've relied on Jordan's Principle for our numeracy and literacy programs, our mental health supports, our speech and language therapy, cultural instructors, nutrition and food security supports, and of course, our student support assistants who primarily support our students who have complex challenges. And this allows them to access education like everybody else. And we've been successful in these applications without delay. We've had a very good relationship with Jordan's Principle through the Indigenous Services Canada up until May of 2025, when we suddenly and unexpectedly started experiencing denials for our applications that we've submitted. So far, the ISC has denied over $9 million in applications for supports and services for our Sahtu students, starting for the 2024-2025 year and into the 2025-26 year. And these denials are for all of the supports I mentioned: the numeracy and literacy programs, our mental health supports, our speech and language therapies, our cultural instructors, the nutrition program, and student support assistants. Our response to these denials has been that we appealed, as is part of their process, that we are able to appeal. So we've appealed 14 of our files, and the ISC has stated that they determine appeals within 30 business days. However, we have not received any response for these appeals, and some of these files are 10 months old. So through this, we filed further applications with the federal court, forcing them to make a decision on these appeals, and that has been struck down. So we're still waiting to find out what will happen with these applications. Some of them were denied, some of them we've received no response whatsoever. So we've continued pursuing a complaint through the Human Rights Commission based on ISC's refusal to provide funding to school boards off reserve, such as the SDEC, and Jordan's Principle should apply to all students, First Nations children on or off reserve. with our Jordan's principal funding that we had received in the past, we'd had some very major successes with our students and in our communities. We'd had higher graduation rates. We've had better access to education through busing, through having the support assistants helping our students one-on-one. We've been able to weather COVID much more successfully than we would have otherwise, being that our students were getting the support they needed. And after COVID, there was a lot more to be done in engaging our students and filling the gaps that had widened over that period of time. So we had seen many successes, like I said, and we were very grateful for that. Also, I wanted to mention that the speech therapy, these types of programs really were not accessible otherwise. There are many vacancies in GNWT through health and social services and other areas, and the students of the Sachi region may not have accessed these supports whatsoever if weren't for our ability to access Jordan's principal during that time. So since our denials, we have without our Jordan's principal funding, the SDEC has been funding all of our programming. We've continued our programming with any of our reserve funds that we've had. And we chose that rather than terminating our programs for 2025-26, because we know that terminating those programs will harm our children. That will harm our students and programs that they've come to rely upon. We chose to continue by any means necessary. But SDEC has used all of our carefully conserved internal financial resources into funding this program, but we are projecting a deficit for the next school year and discussing terminating programs and support at some points when we are unable to go forward. So this has been very challenging for us as a school body to not know what's happening with these applications, what's happening with the funding, as was mentioned in the previous presentation. We are faced with a very serious situation in our region. We are appealing, as I mentioned, these denials. We have been going the route of appealing and challenging legally these application denials, and also the applications that are currently in limbo with no decision whatsoever, to try to get some answers and some certainty, because we don't have certainty now as to what funding will be available to us, and we have not yet terminated any of the programming that we've currently been delivering that was made possible originally by Jordan's principal. So we do look forward to finding out what can be done, what can we do, what is the government going to do as far as funding. And also, I think that Jordan's principal really shone a very bright light on the gaps in services for remote communities and for Indigenous students in remote communities. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will hear from YK1. Please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the committee for inviting us today. It is a very important topic. My name is Alan Short. I'm the vice chair of YK1. On our presentation team, to my left, we have Lanza Kowalczyk. He's the assistant superintendent. Then we have Lori Bailey. She's a regional inclusive schooling coordinator. And we'll start with our superintendent, Shirley Zubelis. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Thank you for this opportunity. Coming to speak to this committee, we are going to speak directly to the impacts in our schools due to the loss of Jordan's principal funding. And as Al just mentioned, we have Landon, Lori, and I presenting.
At the core of our work are the key components of the NWT Inclusive Schooling Directive and the Education Act. When we reflect on our students, the supports available, and the expectations outlined in these guiding documents, it becomes clear that there are significant gaps. Jordan's Principal and Inuit Child First funding have been critical in addressing these gaps, particularly in ensuring safe and supported learning environments. The current inclusive schooling funding model does not allow education bodies to fully meet these expectations. For example, our district serves approximately 2,100 students and is funded for only 32 educational assistants. We currently support 41 students on individual education plans and 29 students requiring intimate care. We also support 64 students who require safety and wellness plans, many of whom need consistent one-to-one support to ensure safety. In addition, 578 students require accommodations or modifications to meaningfully access learning in their classroom. The level of need far exceeds the staffing we are funded to provide. These numbers highlight the disparity between what is expected of education bodies and what is currently funded. Jordan's Principal and Inuit Child First funding have been vital in bridging that gap to ensure that First Nations and Inuit children receive services and supports they need. This funding has been essential in providing targeted supports for Indigenous students, including access to therapies, regulation supports, and safe, responsive programming. This funding has had a broader impact across classrooms. Schools have been better able to allocate sufficient staff and resources to support the growing number of students with complex needs. In this way, the funding has strengthened the overall classroom and student well-being.
The supports we applied for through Jordan's Principal are grouped into 6 application types for funding review. Categories included academic, social, emotional, and mental health services. The list captures applications for behavioral and therapeutic supports as well. Schools work with families for all of these applications. Before the start of the 2025-2026 school year, when we became aware of the changes coming to Jordan's Principal and the Inuit Child First funding, every effort was made by our school and district teams to identify the priorities we needed to keep in mind when deliberating on how we would meet the needs of our students with a significantly reduced staff. We know that educational outcomes are vital and fully interconnected and include a student being calm and ready to learn. The top priority with reduced staff was maintaining student and staff safety and wellness. Outcomes must include specific needs like speech and language, physical therapy, inclusive learning environments, behavior, and even intimate care. We rely on compassionate, well-trained sports support staff and teachers.
In September and October of this year, with no Jordan's Principal funding and prior to us receiving funding through the Interim Support Assistant Initiative, we saw an increase in sub-costs of over $90,000. This is a 91% increase from the same time period last year. One school alone saw their sub-costs related to medical leave increase by 1,125%. If we extrapolate the $90,000 from the first 2 months over the course of the school year, we have approximately an increase of $450,000 in sub-costs. That is more than the entire amount of funding we receive for casuals and subs for the school year. While our focus remains on student needs, the reality is this: without sufficient staffing, both one-to-one and flexible support, we cannot meet those needs safely or effectively. We are seeing a significant increase in the complexity and volume of student needs, well beyond what schools managed even 5 years ago, leaving both staff and families overwhelmed. The operational strain was immediate and visible. Extended staff leaves, increased safety incidents, and students leaving classrooms or school grounds without adequate supervision. In many cases, one staff member was responsible for 2 or 3 students with complex needs, an unsustainable and unsafe model that heightened stress for both students and staff. Students are arriving with limited regulation and communication skills. When support is stretched, dysregulation escalates, and behaviors such as running, biting, scratching, spitting, and headbutting became more frequent, resulting in staff injuries. While not solely caused by the loss of Jordan's Principal and Inuit Child First funding, the correlation is clear. When appropriate support is in place, the entire system stabilizes. Dedicated one-to-one support not only meets the needs of that student, it frees additional staff to support others, maintain supervision, and prevent escalation across the classroom. Without adequate staffing, students with learning, communication, and therapeutic goals are unable to access consistent and sufficient support. When dysregulation occurs, without proactive intervention, entire classrooms are disrupted, instruction stops, and students have to evacuate their classroom. With proper supports in place, proactive regulation can be implemented early and learning continues uninterrupted. This is not just a staffing issue. It is a system capacity issue. When supports are in place, schools are safe, responsive, and focused on learning.
It is our responsibility to ensure we are providing inclusive learning environments for all of our students. This includes preparing youth to be part of our larger community. Without funding, these opportunities are limited. Parents are concerned that their child will not have someone to care for them at school. They are concerned that their child is not safe. As an example, students at the high school were not able to attend community programs that required a staff member to accompany them. This limited their learning, their engagement in programming, and resulted in frustration on the part of the student and parents. These things, combined with there being no certainty of levels of support, has led parents to question the school's ability to provide programming for their child. We work within the inclusive school framework to maintain a high standard of education for all learners. The working conditions for some staff are no longer sustainable, and that quality of education and a safe learning environment is at risk. Truly inclusive practices are at risk. We were, and to some degree still are, providing supports well beyond our ability and expertise. And if we have to lean on contracted supports for things such as autism specialists, speech language pathology, and occupational therapy. All of these have contributed to staff making decisions about continuing in their current role or even continuing in education. The next 3 slides are illustrative of the kinds of supports we applied for across the district. They are not only human resources. In some cases, although we applied, we were unable to fill the positions such as speech language pathology, and that speaks to capacity across the system. We were approved for Jordan's Principal funding prior to 25-26 through evidence of need and demonstrated gaps for our students. However, you'll note we were not successful in any of our applications for the 25-26 year. This year, sorry, I misread that. Even though many of the applications were not new. Knowing the changes to the criteria were not confirmed, we definitely tried to manage our expectations. The numbers that you'll see on this slide are representative of our district as a whole. The units may be staff members, service, or special equipment. As noted, these applications were not approved. There was a significant focus in the 25-26 year on providing behavioral supports and social emotional supports and mental health and wellness. There continues to be significant gaps in speech and language services and support.
With Jordan's Principal and Inuit Child First funding, we saw safer schools, fewer staff injuries, fewer classroom evacuations, and more regulated students through consistent, proactive support. It allowed us to support students with dignity by providing one-to-one assistance with mobility, feeding, and personal care so they could fully access learning. We were able to shift from crisis management to a focus on instruction, targeted literacy support, small groups, and meaningful IEP implementation. It restored roles administrators and program support teachers could return to leadership, instructional, and inclusive work rather than filling frontline gaps. Staffing became more balanced and manageable, reducing unsafe and unsustainable situations, such as tripling students with complex needs with a single staff member. Students were able to participate more fully in school life, ensuring rich programming, including safe transitions, outdoor learning, and field trips that supported programming goals. Jordan's Principal and Inuit Child First funding ensured that students requiring speech and language pathology, occupational therapy, behavioral and regulation support could receive these services they required. It also allowed schools to implement recommendations from these therapies and assessments directly into each student's programming, ensuring supports were meaningful and consistent. Overall, it improved both staff and student wellness, with reduced stress, fewer absences, and greater stability in classrooms, resulting in richer learning opportunities. When YK1 began the school year in September without Jordan's Principal funding, the gaps became glaringly visible. Schools were placed in extremely challenging situations.
One of the largest challenges due to the disruption of funding was the loss of qualified education assistants that would support our students with complex needs. Our education assistants provided very meaningful, diverse, and skilled support to our students. One specific skill required for many of our EAs is the ability to support students with the use of communication devices. These communication devices are essential for many of our students to be able to communicate at all with our staff. Working with a child with a communication device has to be taught and practiced. Without that support, a student experiences frustration and faces the loss of communication and dignity. Another major impact was on the students. As has been mentioned previously, the disruption in funding resulted in students going from one-to-one support, having to be doubled or tripled up with a single education assistant. A further impact on the students is that we simply did not have enough staff to effectively establish basic routines that so many students need. And finally, we have significant impacts on our existing staff. The not knowing whether we would receive funding for education assistance has caused significant anxiety across all of our schools. The lack of adequate support to start the school year increases anxiety and led an increase in staff burnout, feelings of being overwhelmed, and an increase in safety risks to staff and students alike. As a result, the focus became crisis management rather than teaching and learning.
While we waited for a decision from Indigenous Services Canada regarding the criteria for applying for Jordan's Principal, and knowing we had the same students and more coming in late August of 2025-26, we had to have a plan. Our students and families were counting on us for many essential services. With the existing EA staff from the funding formula allocation and the 6 funded through the reallocation of our district surplus, there were still many, many plans to be developed that saw one adult with 2 or even 3 students who required that essential care. As you heard, this is not sustainable. The Interim Support Assistant Initiative was put in place in late fall, and with the ISAI support, we were able to recall and staff 44 education assistants. This has resulted in many benefits. The potential loss of these supports for the 2026-27 school year will return us to a position of having to prioritize the safety of students and staff over learning opportunities. Long term, the biggest concern right now is the uncertainty. Staff are very worried about how they will provide a safe learning environment for all students who have needs beyond what can be provided for without that additional support staff. The ability for a second adult in the room to co-regulate with a student as needed allows the rest of the learners to continue their work with the teacher. Future thinking, our goal is to skill build with our students. Without necessary staff, we are not able to be intentional about teaching and practicing these skills for life. Currently, we have students feeling responsible to co-regulate their peers. Parents are concerned about their child, as well as what has to be given up in order for students' needs to be met. There are staff making decisions about their careers based on whether we will have sufficient EAs and the necessary services for all students. While trying to be fiscally responsible as a district, we must ensure the schools have the supports they need. Lastly, we return to the Inclusive Schooling Directive. These are our guiding principles. However, as laid out for you today, current inclusive schooling funding does not match school realities. Student success requires proper supports to be available for a truly inclusive environment. Our district supports over 600 diagnoses, with more than 130 students requiring intensive support. Classrooms have changed. And we know supports come in many forms, including caring, trained staff. Students and schools also need access to specialists and services to provide safe and inclusive learning environments. While Jordan's principal funding was established specifically to support and bridge gaps for Indigenous students, the impact has been felt across our school communities. Schools are filled with highly capable children that deserve our best. As passionate educators and advocates, we will continue to provide the very best opportunities for our students and we truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. For our final presentation this afternoon, we will hear from South Slave Divisional Board of Education Council. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Penny Pokiak, and I serve as chair of the South Slave Divisional Education Council. Today, I will speak about how Jordan's principal funding supports students in our schools and what the impacts will be if this funding is reduced or delayed. Across the South Slave region, schools rely on these supports to help students with complex needs safely attend school and participate in learning. Next slide, please. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a clear overview of how Jordan's principal funding currently supports students across our schools. We will begin with the regional context and then share examples from schools across the South Slave region. These examples illustrate how this funding helps schools support students with complex needs. Next slide, please. Before discussing individual schools, it is important to understand the regional trend. Over the past several years, as you can see, the number of students requiring Jordan's principal support has increased significantly across South Slave schools. These requests include services such as speech language therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral supports, and support assistance for students with complex needs. The data on this slide shows how both the number of students supported and the funding required to meet those needs has grown over time. This reflects a broader trend we are seeing in our classrooms, where more students require specialized supports in order to access learning. Next slide, please. Jordan's principal funding currently fills gaps in specialized services that schools cannot provide through the current territorial education funding formula. These services include therapy supports, support assistance, and specialized intervention programs. For many students, these supports are essential to safely participate in school and in the classroom. Next slide, please. In many South Slave communities, specialized services such as speech therapy or occupational therapy are simply not available locally. Jordan's principal funding has allowed schools to bring in specialists from outside the region who work directly with students and school staff. Without this funding, many students will not receive the therapy services they need and require to participate in school. Next slide, please. Across the South Slave region, schools are seeing increasing numbers of students with complex developmental and learning needs. This is alarming. Many students require multiple supports in order to participate safely in the classroom. Jordan's principal funding allows schools to provide these supports to those students. Next slide, please. Det'anchogh School in Fort Resolution currently has 20 students with complex needs through Jordan's principal funding. These supports allow students to participate safely in the classroom, learning and regulate within the school environment. Without these supports, many students would struggle to remain engaged in the classroom. Next slide, please. Paul William Kaiser High School in Fort Smith. Currently at Paul William Kaiser High School, 37 students currently receive support through Jordan's principal funding. These services help students remain engaged in school and progress towards graduation. These include one-to-one support assistance, tier 3 literacy intervention, mental health counseling, and transition programming. Next slide, please. Diamond Jeunesse Secondary School in Hay River. Currently, Diamond Jeunesse Secondary School offers Jordan Principal supports to 41 Indigenous students. These supports help students remain regulated, engaged, and progressing towards graduation. So student example, graduation outcomes for Indigenous students have increased significantly as these supports have expanded. Next slide, please. Let's Okay School and Let's Okay. Jordan's principal funding allows the school to provide support services across the entire student population. This is 30 students in kindergarten to grade 8 currently benefit from Jordan's principal supported services. These services are critical in a small remote community where specialized supports are otherwise not available. Next slide, please. Joseph Burr Tyrell Elementary School in Fort Smith. Jordan's principal funding previously supported full-time speech therapy at Joseph Burr Tyrell Elementary. That allowed 20 to 35 students each year to receive speech support directly through the school. Without these services, students with speech delays often fall behind in literacy and communication skills. So a student example here, a grade 4 student with significant speech delay struggles to communicate clearly with teachers and classmates. During a recent incident, staff were unable to fully understand what he was trying to say. Without consistent speech therapy support, he remains several grade levels behind in reading and writing. Next slide, please. Chief Sunrise Education Center. Chief Sunrise currently uses Jordan's principal funding to support transportation for students. However, the school has identified many additional students who require speech and language supports, and applications have been submitted for these services. Next slide, please. So Harry Capsule School and Princess Alexander School in Hay River. I will talk about them separately. So at Harry Capsule, there are currently 16 students who receive direct support daily from Jordan's principal funding. At Princess Alexander School, there are additional 16 students who receive direct support daily. Without the direct support, these students would face substantial inequality while at school. Of those 32 students, 7 students have complex needs that are medically diagnosed and require daily 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 support, only available through Jordan's principal funding. Both Harry Capsule and Princess Alexander schools are only core funded for 2 student assistants each for the entire school. Without Jordan's principal funding, several students, including those with complex medical needs, will go without required supports for the 26-27 school year. Aside from the direct student support provided by Jordan's principal funding, Harry Capsule NPA also began a collaborative partnership with Det'anchogh Services, a team of dedicated allied health specialists from Alberta, in 2023 as an attempt to secure the necessary services for our students with complex learning and medical needs. Services provided by Det'anchogh therapists secured by the school have also taken place within the home, further benefiting our students and families who are eligible for Jordan's principal funding. Pediatric physiotherapists and speech language pathologist services are not available in Hay River and have not been so for years. The current occupational therapist, who has limited pediatric OT experience and is responsible for delivering services to the entire community. Therefore, consistent direct rehabilitation services for our highest needs children in our community are not available. Next slide, please. So system-wide impacts. When these services disappear, the impact extends far beyond our individual students. Teachers spend more time managing crisis and less time teaching. Families also will experience additional stress when services their children depend on are no longer available within our schools. Next slide, please. Regional impact across SSDEC schools. When we look across the South Slave region, Jordan's principal funding supports well over 150 students through a variety of specialized services. These supports help students remain in school and succeed within their communities. The reduction to Jordan's principal funding results in the total loss of 53 positions across the South Slave Divisional Education Council, which is equivalent to 43.2 full-time staff, which in turn will have a catastrophic impact on direct supports for students with complex needs. Next slide, please. Why continued support matters. Schools across the South Slave region are committed to supporting every student. Jordan's principal funding has allowed many students to access services that would otherwise not exist within their communities. Ensuring stable and predictable access to this funding is critical for maintaining equitable education opportunities for students across the Northwest Territories. During the years of insufficient funding and limited services from the Hay River Health and Social Services Authority and the Stanton Child Development Team, our schools have witnessed, and more importantly, our students and staff have experienced the following consequences: developmental regression or plateau, worsening mental health, increased behavior challenges, physical health decline, family crisis and caregiver burnout, school staff burnout, lower school-wide levels of achievements, student and safety concerns, and long-term consequences. We ask for continued political support to encourage changes at the federal level for Jordan's principal to consider schools in the Northwest Territories, same as those on reserves, since over 97% of the NWT's Indigenous population live off reserve. We also encourage our elected officials to further examine the current funding formula used by the GNWT to fund schools and allow for extra resources and funding to be provided to students with diagnosed needs. Funding therapy service and student assistance is an investment in access, equity, and human potential. Without it, we are knowingly allowing preventable regression, mental health decline, and family crisis to continue. Our students deserve comprehensive support, and we have a responsibility to them to fight for those resources that make that support possible. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's good to hear from all four education body. I know that education and independent are very important. We know that. And I do hear your concerns, your worry, because we all have the same, we all worry too as well, especially for me, especially in the small communities where many of our young people have not received the help that they needed in early years. So we know that JP program made it possible. And it is good to hear, from the education bodies where it helped many of our Indigenous students. The program helped our Indigenous students where they are thriving, and it helped with the graduation rate. It's good, it's encouraging, it's good. So, I'm not too sure if I should mention this, but I'll say it anyways. In my region, because of this missed opportunity, and I know one of the educators knows, some of our young people did not get the help that they needed. They're in their early 20s, and they're in a group home down south, in a southern institution. And it's heartbreaking for many of the families. It's heartbreaking for parents. They want their kids back. But because of, because of the missed opportunity and JP program, we didn't have JP program at that time. So it's good to, I do hear you. I do hear your concerns. So thank you. And so I would like to go to the committee. So we will now begin with our question and answer session. And I would like to ask them, please direct your question to the specific education body. I will go with the two in the room here. So which one would go first? Okay, Julian, MLA Morris. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the boards who presented. Really appreciate you coming and sharing this with us publicly. I know, as a YK MLA, I've met with the two YK school boards and talked to both of them about this and heard from them in detail in different meetings about the impact of this. So much of what you're sharing, of course, isn't new to me, but it is the first time we've talked about it in public meeting. And yeah, as I've said in those meetings, the gravity of this problem is very clear to me. And you've made that very clear to me. So I don't have a ton of questions, but I have a few things to say. One is that this is yet another example for me of the the double-edged sword of receiving federal funding, which, of course, we always deeply appreciate when it comes in. However, the chaos that ensues when it is lost or dropped quickly is a real problem here in the territory. And I think I do put that issue at the feet of the feds. I think they need to recognize responsibility for the programs they create. And as I've put it, the chaos that ensues when they pull the rug out from under a program. And I don't think that doing that in this case was a fair way to manage the problems identified with Jordan Principal that they've identified needed to be solved. I think it would have been much better to ensure continuity was maintained while figuring out how to fix problems with the program in the long run. Because we've all been left scrambling to figure this out, and it isn't fair because, as you've illustrated so clearly, it's teachers and students who suffer as a result of that, and it's very unfortunate that decisions which I think could be seen as being made at the kind of bureaucracy level are affecting students. The one thing I do want to ask about is and highlight is that in the budget that MLA's just approved in mid-March, $30 million of funding was approved for inclusive schooling. And so my understanding of that is that that will be distributed in the near future and is meant to cover the gaps left by Jordan's Principal. So I'm not sure how much awareness you have of that funding at even a high level. But it's very clear to me, based on the presentations we've received today, that work is needed on figuring out how that funding will be distributed, when that will happen, and that you are clearly communicated with by the department in a timely manner so you can plan accordingly. So to take all that and put it into a question, that is the question I have, is how much awareness you have of that funding and whether you've been reached out to yet with any kind of specifics. And if not, I mean, I guess the next question will have to go to the minister herself about, what the department is doing to ensure that you are being openly communicated with about what the department is doing to address this problem in the short and long term. So I don't have a specific board to put that to. I mean, I have the YK1 board in front of me now, and I think, sorry, there's a representative from YCS as well. So.
Okay, so open to
anyone to answer.
Okay,
yeah.
So I will leave it open.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. We are aware of the funding. We were following Cabinet closely during the budget deliberations, and we're aware that it is earmarked for inclusive schooling. Beyond that, we have no definitive direction for how that's going to play out at the school level. But we are aware of it. Yeah, we have hopes.
Okay, MLA Morris, you have a follow-up?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I guess I don't really have a follow-up question, but I think that'll be communication that committee will have to have with the minister about just ensuring that, I think what really needs to happen here on the ground is the department and school boards and administration need to get clear with each other about what's happening. And it sounds like, I mean, for the department, I mean, this funding was just approved, so I imagine they are probably scrambling internally to figure out how this is all going to be distributed. But clearly there's an urgency here, so I think we can communicate that to them. So I don't really have questions. I mean, like I said, we've met about this quite a bit, and so I do have a good understanding of the issue, but appreciate the school boards coming today to present to us and share publicly the gravity of the situation. I think it's important for the public to understand what's going on. Can commit myself. I mean, I was very interested to see them bring forward that $30 million, and we advocated for it because of the advocacy that the school boards have done with us. And so the next question now is getting that in place. And then, of course, after that, longer term solutions to this problem. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, MLA Morris. Next, we have MLA Testart. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentations from the school boards and education district authorities. I mean, this issue started like before the funding was pulled. School boards or education bodies generally did a great job of setting the stakes. And I think that at least helped me. And I know several of my colleagues kind of see where we were headed and push really hard to get as much of that funding back as possible or support the schools. The issue really is the magnitude of the funding that was lost, and that to readjust those priorities would take significant political will from limited resources at the territorial level. But that being said, I do want to talk about that because as much as it is important to have a united front on Jordan's principle, and I think every politician in the territory is on board with that approach and has spoken loudly on it, if we cannot change or successfully lobby the federal government to do the right thing and invest appropriately in the success of children, what are we going to do? So the inclusive education review, we haven't seen it yet. It's interesting that the funding is rolling out before we've seen the review, but the minister has seen the review, the department has seen the review. So I hope it's not a scramble. I think like some the housing money was in some regards, because that was a new concession that came out a couple budget cycles ago. So we know there's 30 million coming. Fundamentally, is that enough to close the gap that you're experiencing? And what kind of changes are needed, not just to the dollar amount, but to how flexible the funding is? Because I did hear several comments to that extent in the presentations. So what advice can you give us for improving the flow of territorial funds, both in terms of making them more flexible to meet the needs and in terms of dollar amounts that we need to advocate for? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so that's to both education bodies. So we will go with superintendent. Okay, to Yellowknife Catholic School Board.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. It's a good question. 30 million is not enough, but it's a start. I feel that, we have proven over years that district educational authorities, we know the how and we know what's best for our students, and so we need to have flexibility and autonomy to make sure that things are not too prescriptive in how we utilize our funds. That's first and foremost, because every community is unique, and we are on a bigger journey because of this chaos that you've talked about. But also, we have learned that we need to know more and have specific data as to who our children are and what they need. And so I'm hoping that, and what I would suggest is that, it's, one is about the funding, but also too, it is about our relationship of how we talk to each other and collaborate and really come together to research as a territory and to have the evidence as to how we need to be strategic. Because children today have so many challenges, and we are trying to teach our teachers about the brain development. And what is it that our children need to engage in schools? And it is about a team approach to education and not siloed, as I talked about a lot today. So we have to use the funds, and then also to have, cross-representation of working together as to how we're going to do this overall strategically in the North. And it's the responsibility from the Premier on down. But it's going to take some time, and it's going to take, as I heard today, the will and the motivation from the bureaucracies as well as the frontline people to figure out what is our priority. And I think right now we have to Band-Aid the scrambling chaos of getting more staff back into schools and to resurrect some of our supports. But we can't continue to Band-Aid with the money because we'll never have enough. So we have to shift and really have a vision for territorial education, and that will cost time. And it will cost humility to talk about why are we continuing to have these high barriers, you know, from the top down. And I really feel like, you know, the fear is the fear of the fact that it's overwhelming the needs of our children. So if we, but we can't, we have to be unified in our approach, and that's just basically my perspective.
Thank you. Yes, yeah, please.
It was mentioned earlier about stabilizing, and I think to Liz's point, that's what Jordan's Principal and Child First Initiative funding has done, allowed us to stabilize after some very tumultuous years. And now we're seeing the evidence of those very large gaps which are continuing to grow. As schools, we don't have the luxury of bureaucracy. We don't have that. It is right there. We need to deal with this right now. And I think that part of that moving forward is understanding the students of today. They are very different. Families are very different. The realities of our schools are that they're unlike anything I've seen, and Liz, and combined, we have about 100 years of experience, I think. So it's definitely not the reality that we were brought up through the ranks as teachers. So it's critical that we work within the government, work with one another, and build those relationships, and strengthen those relationships.
Thank you. I would like to ask Chair Barasa and Chair Pokiak if they would like to speak to this question as well.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. It's Heather. I'd just like to say that as far as Satu is concerned, we were using Jordan's Principal for about $7 million a year, which was subsidizing our overall budget. So I don't think that the 30 million over 10 school boards is going to cover that. But I wanted to say that as part of the budget issues or the concerns that we see, as I was mentioning in my presentation, it really shone a light on the lack of services in other areas. Like the school board and the schools were taking on, as many of them have mentioned already, taking on assessments, speech therapy, just various other supports that maybe shouldn't have been the responsibility of these small school boards to have such big wraparound services because the GNWT is not filling positions or they're not funding things. There's mental health workers that a lot of vacancies, and we've been, not just our school board, but as you've heard, other school boards were making all of that happen on their own. So it seemed like a lot of programming on the shoulders of school boards to support the students in more than just getting an academic education. So I think that that's a big gap that the GNWT needs to think about, besides just this education piece. As you heard from everybody, they're responding to so much for our students, and it just goes beyond teachers, I think, at this point. And as I mentioned also in our presentation, we've taken a real direct approach, like about appealing these decisions and forcing the issue as to getting these applications looked at through Jordan's Principal. It's like human rights for Indigenous students and in these communities. Yes, so trying to take a more proactive approach in looking at the federal responsibilities for Indigenous kids. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Chair Pokiak, would you like to speak to the question as well? Okay, didn't get no reply, so then we will move on to MLA. Okay, MLA Tester, do you have a follow-up question?
No, thank you. That's fine. If something else comes to me, I'll let you know. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for those responses. We'll continue our efforts to assist all schools in the Northwest Territories as a committee in the days remaining of our term, which are fast coming to an end. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. MLA Morgan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So thanks to all the education bodies for the presentations today. It definitely reinforces clearly how much reliance there has been on this funding to just ensure basic functioning of the schools. This, we're hearing loud and clear, this is not extra optional funding, this is core to school functioning. I wanted to pick up on a few recommendations or comments that were made around training for educators. The YCS presentation first, the third recommendation there was around targeted educator training. And I know that YK1 also mentioned the need, for example, that support staff need to be trained on the use of communication devices and the specific ways that students need to be helped. So my question is around, was Jordan's Principle funding previously funding this kind of educator training that you're talking about, or was it funding, hiring the bodies? Was there a gap before in terms of training the support staff? I can see how it's an important gap, but I guess my question is, was this covered by Jordan's Principle before, or is it something that's been kind of an ongoing need that we need to move forward with further training of education assistants and support staff? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So, YK1?
Thank you. So I don't think that it's necessarily that the training was provided through Jordan's Principle means. What we need is more timely hiring of educational assistants so that we have that time to make sure that the training is done well. Through the funding formula, we do have a budget for training. It was just that it was a lagging of when we were able to hire. And it's ongoing, so it isn't just something that happens once and we're done. Also, within that, inclusive schooling funding budgets are used to support hiring of educational assistants. So that may decrease the funding that's used for professional development or learning or training.
Okay. Yellowknife Catholic School Board.
For us, we have a very significant training plan that we use with our inclusive schooling ECE dollars. So that was part of when we did the proposals for Jordan's Principle. That's what we considered was our in-kind, is that we, of course, with the new staff, social emotional coaches, Det'anchogh teachers, helping our support and literacy teachers, numeracy teachers, that was part of what we would contribute in the in-kind. But when it came to speech language services, we got funding for a speech language pathologist, but we also have 3 speech language assistants. And so we use Jordan's Principle dollars to train with that very specific technical skill that an assistant requires. And also too, in order to make sure we had fidelity and rigor, the speech path is the only one that can supervise speech language assistants as they do reinforcement therapy for children with language disorders. So we would never, ever be able to afford, that price point of hiring a speech path to, supervise our assistants who do speech language therapies. We also have had to, in our Jordan's Principle proposal, source people who have, the background, especially when they're working with kids with significant trauma or behavioral challenges, that we gave them supervision from outside counselors and people to make sure that, once again, they're doing things appropriately, because of the fact that we never want to have people doing practices that are out of our scope of practice. As the other person said, we are having to, tread into water that is out of our scope of practice. So it's really inherent on us to make sure that we are hiring people who have that expertise to help our staff, make sure that they have fidelity and they're doing the right things, because we don't want to further, create trauma or do things inappropriately. So there's lots of layers to this, but there was portions of, Jordan's Principle funding that helped us train our staff.
Okay, thank you. Before we go on for a second, I would like to ask the two education bodies if they would like to speak to this question as well. Oh, Chair Bourassa, yes, go ahead.
Hi, yes, just to respond to that question, yes, in all of our Jordan's Principle applications of the past, it included training. It included training as part of the proposal that we put forward. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. MLA Morgan, you have a follow-up question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard from several of the school boards frustrations around siloing, or I think what we're referring to, and I wanted to clarify here, like the removal of supports from, say, health and social services that used to more directly provide, for example, speech language pathology services. So I wanted to ask, on one hand, recommendation 4 from the Catholic School Board talked about siloing around student care and waiting too long. And so I wanted to find out if you're talking specifically about health and social services and what exactly you're waiting for, just so we're all clear. But I also heard from Chair Bourassa the very astute observation that education bodies have gradually been asked to take over responsibilities that used to be carried out by health and social services. And so, and I think she also mentioned that there wouldn't necessarily have been specialists residing in the Satu region, but you'd have to bring in experts and specialists from the outside. I'm wondering if I can get more information on how things used to be, like what roles HSS used to take on or provide in terms of SLPs, and how that has been sort of taken away or disappeared, and just to better understand the gaps that are left. To what extent is it a result of the loss of services from HSS? And I wondered if the school boards can speak with more details about that loss of supports. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Which school board? Ms. Waddell or? Okay.
Well, I'll
Okay,
keep it.
one?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'll just keep it to speech and language pathology as the example. But if we were to go back, let's say 7 or 8 years ago, in my role at that time as a PST, we would have a school pathologist come into the school. And they would have a caseload, they would work with students, they would do assessments and ongoing therapeutic services. And we would work as a very close team. They would meet with the teachers and with the EAs, and we would be able to help continue those recommendations on throughout the weeks that they couldn't possibly be there. That doesn't happen now at all. So that would be that example. And if, for example, you were to in order to even access speech and language, it doesn't go past grade kindergarten, actually. So if once you enter grade 1, if you have complex needs, students are not, there's no available therapy for those students.
Okay, Yellowknife School Board, Ms. Bale?
That's a very big question. But I will say three things. One is that we are now with the, Health and Social Services, education, and other, government agencies, we have to, because of the legislation, be very consent-driven. And we cannot share information, or we cannot sit around a table unless there's, consent. And while we honor that and respect that, we have to look at what other governments are doing when it comes to especially kids in foster care, kids in care, and kids that have been under-identified, and we are at a crisis point with them. And we have to trust the professionalism and respect each other's scope of practice. But this consent piece is a default. This consent piece is a barrier for us being able to do what we know we can do as educators, and I believe what health professionals who work with us in child development, as well as social workers, in trying to be able to really, once again, respond to those really big cases of kids who are in crisis for one reason or another. And if you look at the province of BC, they have established between health and social services, social workers, and educators what's called a data platform, where it's called Priority Students. And they have a database that they share between those two departments on specific students and families that have a red light, a yellow light, and a green light. And so what are things we can share without contravening the confidentiality and ethics, so that we can get where we need to go to give that child and that family support? And where do we do have to follow the legislation? And right now, I have experienced in my 43 years a further retreat from all of us. And I speak, and I'm retiring soon, so I can say this, that we are so busy trying to preserve our supports. We have to be polarized. And we cannot longer. When I met with that meeting with the hospital, I recognized, yes, they have 2 out of 14 speech language pathology positions filled. I have 127 children with language disorders and so many more under-identified. My current early screening for our kindergarten alone is 28 children out of 32 that are showing that they are delayed in speech. They can't service them, and we are trying to help our children function in schools. So how do we work together to problem solve? How do we work with each other to, look at our restraints, but really then be strategic together as to how we're going to get that done? We have strategies and skilled people who can do it at a teacher professional, but we also need the support of pathologists to help us navigate the clinical pieces so we don't, as I said before, do inappropriate practices because we don't know enough about what the child is presenting with. Does that make sense? So there's lots to this, and I just feel that, in the days of Jan Sterling and in the days of Arlene Hachet and other people we You know, Janice McKenna, we could pick up the phone and just have a conversation to deal with those families and put aside our worries of confidentiality. And I don't think that exists as much anymore. And you know, as Lori says, we were able to push those barriers down and focus on, as I said before, we have to have, instead of a deficit consent-driven model in the territories, we must have a team around children. We have to have a team approach around children. That's the BC model. I'm not touting it, but that's the vision and the mindset of government and the Ministry of Education in BC, because the needs are too great.
Okay. Thank you. Now we go to Chair Pokiak. Please proceed.
Hi, so prior to the JP funding, students in, I'm going to say most of the South Slave went without any therapy services. So like someone had mentioned before that, you know, all of our schools are unique. They are all different. I would say in the smaller centers, a lot of those positions are obsolete. So therefore the services are not provided in the communities, full stop. Yeah. And the Jordan's Principal funding has provided those services within our schools.
Okay. Thank you. Chair Barassa, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Just as Chair Pokiak mentioned, I just wanted to say also in the Satu region, as to how things used to be, we had received speech pathology services or occupational therapy services from Beaufort Delta. The Satu doesn't have it on their own. We were sharing services with Beaufort Delta, and there would be, and there has been, and currently vacancies, I believe, with Beaufort Delta, and we are being serviced in the Satu region. Not at all. There's no services in those areas for us, and it's been this way for years. And we have about 120 students in the Satu that we are servicing through the speech therapies through Jordan's Principal, which they'd be receiving no services, not just through the school, but if they were to go to the health center, they may have to fly to Inuvik and there's nobody there. So there's just big gaps in those services. Our current territorial budget that we receive is about $296,000 from our territorial funding to cover mental health and wellness. And we've been spending about $1 million a year with, of course, our Jordan's Principal support and for mental health and wellness. And this is including like the tiny eye or the speech pathology services, and also mental health workers. We've worked with the territories and with health and social services before. In previous years, all of the school boards, along with health and social services, worked very hard to provide mental health services into the communities through their CYCC program. And that was not successful. It was not effective. And each of us through Jordan's Principal have been able to, I think, customize or to do more for our school boards that's more accessible and has been more successful. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll go to MLA Yakalaya. Do you have a question?
I have a lot of questions. I want to thank all the boards for speaking to us and telling us the huge frustrations that they're all going through. I mean, I hear your frustrations and I feel it right now too. I wasn't too sure about the magnitude of how this was affecting the school boards. I heard some from some of the teachers in some of my communities, but I didn't realize there was this much. And to think about it, I was thinking like there's two, one of the presenters mentions there's 2 out of 4 specialty, is it speech pathologists in the Northwest Territories that are filled. How were you guys able to manage going through the school boards and get all the services you needed for all of your students? That's 2 people doing all of this work in the whole territory. That's amazing that you guys were able to make this happen. And speaking to the for the smaller communities, like the remote ones that you have to fly in and fly out, having the frustration of not being able to get a support person in there to help you with speech pathology is it's amazing that you guys have worked this hard and worked this well to maintain what you had with the funding from Jordan's principal. And like my colleague has said, they're not looking at the chaos that ensued after pulling the rug out from under you. So my question is, I guess, how are you dealing with it now? And how are the parents responding? How are the parents responding to the loss of the funding and the things that they have to go through? Like we have as a government, we have to from housing to health. We have to really look at advocating for this continuance of this funding. So that's what the question is in there. Thank you.
Thank you. So which school board would like to go first? Ms. Waddell or Ms. Bale? Okay.
Like has been mentioned, there's a lot of families who are accessing our supports in our schools, and without the help of the schools, they don't know where to go or how to access these services. We've talked about wait times. Well, when you recognize that maybe there's a problem with your child and you have to wait 1.5 years to get in to see somebody because we don't have the staff, or there's the opportunity, well, we can fly you to Edmonton to see a specialist. That's not a solution. You're taking children away from their education to get medical help. There's a lot of families that just don't know how to do life with kids with complex needs. The schools know how to access a lot of these services, and I think we need to be able to support our schools and say, okay, we know that you've got connections with health, we have connections with our own speech language people. How do we continue this to make that journey easier on parents and families so they're not having to struggle so much? Thank you.
Please proceed.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just add that we have created, starting on April, a process to sit with each family that we've been working with, who first and foremost have worked with us to ensure that their child has a classroom assistant or an educational assistant. So we are going to have meetings with them and sit down with them and talk about it, and once again show that their children's education is really important for us, and that they have to do some work themselves as families to access Jordan's principal, because we no longer can on their behalf. And then, like I said, and Shirley said it, we are in a big cloud of unpredictability and unknowing, because we do not know what we have for next year. And so we are also in a waiting game. We are happy to hear about the 30 million, but we start that dialogue with our families in a couple weeks to let them know that what their child once had through Jordan's principal is no longer available. And then we will also be talking to our non-Indigenous parents to say that they also too will not be getting the same supports as last year, unless something comes within, before April. So the families, some of them know, but some of them have yet to really understand the severity of what it means for their child. And so we don't know what that means and what they're going to respond to, but there will be the continued grief that families with children with disabilities have, right? Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Miss, okay.
So I think this just illustrates once again the role of the school, the importance of the school. Parents rely on the school, families rely on the school to navigate processes when they do have a child with significant needs or diagnoses. And when a child is diagnosed with something, there's no one there to support or implement the recommendations. If we don't have these support people, we're still not able to do anything for the family or for the child. So without that continued support, and chaos did reign supreme in the months that we didn't have support. It was very difficult. You know, as my colleague Lennon mentioned, the uptick in sick leave was astronomical. Astronomical. We wouldn't be able to continue on throughout the year. The sub-budget was just depleted. And then the subs were saying, sorry, we can't. So having the school as that central support for navigating for families is really critical. But it puts a heavy burden on the school, and it puts a very heavy burden on the staff.
Okay, thank you. Chair Barasa, Chair Polk, do you want to speak to this question as well?
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. To Cheryl's question regarding how are parents and families reacting to this, we also haven't fully accepted the situation, as in we are appealing these applications. We've started a federal, court process to try to get a response and possibly even appeal the applications that have been denied and get answers for the ones that haven't even been responded to. So, and it leaves us, as was previously mentioned, in a lot of uncertainty as to what kind of decisions we're going to be making in the coming months with our budget. But as to date, we've continued in the Satu all of our programming that was previously made possible by Jordan's Principle. The students and the parents haven't yet been faced with not having the funding or not having that programming, and we've not begun those conversations. And at least for us in the Satu, we're holding off for as long as possible and using all of our current resources to try to continue supporting our staff and our students to the capacity that we had been previously, and with the Jordan's Principle funding that was available to us. Thank you.
Thank you. MLA Yakalaya, do you have a follow-up question?
Sorry, could I just speak also?
Okay, yes, please go ahead, Chair Polk.
So our funding is in place, our current funding from JP is in place until the end of the 25-26 school year. So we are still diligently trying to work on our applications, and we're having all the conversations that are happening almost on a daily basis with JP workers. We have started applying for individual students to try a different avenue to see if we can get applications approved, in terms of trying to get funding set up for the next school year. Parents that are in the know, because I don't think all the parents understand the magnitude of what this is going to mean. But there are parents that do understand and that are, starting to hit panic mode. So we are working through that. And this is going to take an all hands on deck approach. And I do agree we all have to work together to help solve this and I will just mention, throw this little plug in there, but that funding formula hasn't been changed in about 34 years. So that is something to sit back and reflect on and really push your fellow MLAs to think about that and take that into consideration. Because we've seen other things have skyrocketed in the price, and we are using the same formula funding for education for the last 34 years. That is alarming.
Thank you. Ms. MLA Yakalaya, do you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to all the presenters for their answers. The other question I have is, what is your plan for the support training and with the dollars that you have? And because we talked about it has to take a whole hands-on approach to this, because you're dealing with children that have special needs, and there's times that families don't know how to deal with what you say you guys are dealing with because you have the training. Is there a plan to include the families in part of your training? So, or is that another area that we have to look at as leaders? Because in order to, we always say it takes a whole community to raise a child, one child. Now we're talking about a lot of children that have special needs in our territory. So do you have plans to include parents in your training? If not, are you able to do that? And that's what I want to know. And if there's support that's needed from there, will you let us know? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, a really wonderful question and an important question. We do, when we contract our private consultants, we do give parents a special time by themselves with those consultants for questions that they maybe don't want to share with the educational system. We try to support our parents. We do not provide specific training for parents because we just don't have the manpower to do that. But I feel it's so critical. We support families in a lot of ways. I feel that families trust us and they come to us. But once again, we don't have something very defined and specific for them.
Thank you. Ms. Bill, or, oh no, yes.
Thank you. As Liz mentioned, we have had, or we still do have, opportunities when contractors will work with families one-on-one rather than as a group, really to respect the family and the dignity of the child and the family and the circumstances. In the past, we did do whole family, or we invited families for evenings where we provided some activities and things that would help support families in the home with their child. Unfortunately, we don't have that capacity anymore, and I do feel that it bleeds over a little bit into other areas that are not our responsibility.
Thank you. Chair Polkiak?
So I guess the question or the answer to your question would be that if the JP funding is canceled and if new funding does not come in its place, there will be no training. There will be no additional supports for students, for parents. This is a full stop. The great things that we have been seeing over the last couple of years will be gone. They will be taken out of our schools, and they will have an impact on every child in the classroom and every teacher left standing. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chair Barasa, would you like to answer too as well? Getting no reply. Okay, since we have no more questions, oh, okay. Okay, yes.
Sorry, apologize.
Yes, we have invited families and parents to participate in training when it's available. And often, like through the Jordan's Principal funding, we've had a lot of one-on-one supports, like as previously mentioned, with the support assistance for students with complex needs. And families have been a big part of those applications and the journey those students have taken. And a lot of students without Jordan's Principal funding and support would not even be attending school with some of the issues or challenges that they're faced with. They may not have any access to adequate programming in the school. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I want to say thank you to all the presenters for coming, for presenting to us on the topic of the impacts of Jordan Principles funding. So to hear the frontline and systemic impacts directly from you has been important. And we thank you again for coming. So thank you very much. And with that, this public proceedings close. Thank you.